We're glad that you've joined us for another 30 minutes of Insight for Living with Chuck Swindoll. Chuck invites us to turn with him to the 5th chapter of 1 Timothy, where he resumes our expositional study of Paul's first-century letter. Timothy, remember, was a young pastor, and he was just beginning to understand the unique challenges associated with shepherding a flock of believers. And so, as a seasoned veteran, Paul drafted this correspondence to help Timothy out. Capturing the spirit of Paul's letter, Chuck calls our series of studies Excellence in Ministry. And that's what we hope to achieve in our respective church families, a standard of biblical excellence. Well, in chapter 5, Paul addresses another practical subject. This time he talks about an important cross-section of the congregation, those women who have lost their husbands by death and who have no family to support them. It might be good for all of us to be thinking about what our own church families have done to meet the needs of those women. Chuck calls today's study, What About Widows?
We want to turn our attention to the 5th chapter of 1 Timothy as we continue our study through this letter. And as we do that, we come to a section in the center of the chapter that addresses the whole subject of widows. In fact, it is the most extensive section in all Scripture on the subject of widows. You know, to people who don't know any better, Paul comes across as a woman hater. I was teaching a class a number of years ago on Monday mornings to a group of women who really wanted to know something of the Scriptures, but had spent most of their lives out of Bible-teaching churches and away from the Bible. And I was a bit surprised to find that the general opinion of the ladies in that particular Monday morning class was clearly that the Apostle Paul simply did not like women. And they had come across such sections in the New Testament as the part that says the woman is to keep silent in the church. And in another place, he is the one who exhorts her not to take or exercise or exert authority over the man in the leadership of a local church. That the Apostle Paul is the one who says on more than one occasion that she is to be submissive to her husband. And those are fighting words in our day. He even has the audacity to say to her to stay at home and to keep house. And if you really press 1 Corinthians 7, you might even think he's against marriage, because he says that those who do not marry are able to give, quote, undistracted devotion to Christ, end of quote. And he's saying all the way through that chapter that we are to concern ourselves with the things of the Lord, and if we marry, then we have to concern ourselves with the things of the world. I've been studying this book for about 30 years, and I can assure you, not as a casual observer, but as a serious student of Scripture, Paul doesn't hate women. It's interesting how people form opinions. I know of one particular lady in our area who visited our church one time. It was the time that I spoke out of 1 Timothy chapter 2 on women. And she has made it clear that that's her last time to come, because I am like the Apostle Paul. I also am against women. It's interesting how people come to that conclusion. I live with a woman very happily and delightfully, and I take my cues from the New Testament on how to treat women and how to deal with a wife and how to handle a family as a leader of a home. And on the contrary, I have had my whole opinion of women enlightened, and I have found that that role of the woman is extremely significant. And in fact, when I come to a section like this, I'm grateful for the Apostle Paul, because I don't know of too many people that write so kindly and with such concern for those who have lost their mates than the Apostle Paul. I'll tell you, this man believes in holding in great respect those who are bereaved of their mates. Those who go through a time of grief, those whose grief lingers, as well as those who get over the grief and are to go on with their lives. But the one word that is used by this apostle, and used very carefully with emphasis, is to give honor to her. It's in a particular tense, this command, that means to continue, to have it a prevailing attitude. The assembly is to look at the widow with a view of honor, and it is to be a prevalent, emphatic sense of honor. That's to be our spirit. That's to be our attitude. Now, what is the responsibility to these individuals? If you look right through this passage, you'll see some very interesting things that are said. First, those who have living relatives. Now, in verse 4, she's mentioned. If a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to practice piety in regard to their own family, and to make some return to their parents, for this is acceptable in the sight of God.